Hey guys, welcome back to Joko Yo. And today I am about to bring back a potentially painful subject for some of you. Sorry, but for some of you, if this shows up as a category in Jeopardy or some other trivia-based game like Trivial Pursuit, you may throw up your hands in disgust because you know you just lost. Okay, now for others of you, it might make you smile in confidence. Now, since I work with teachers all day, I know quite a few of you. And now, the final Jeopardy category today is literary figures of the 1920s. I have legitimately seen this as a category. And it's not going to be nearly as painful as you may remember some of your English classes being. But, yeah, you know what, you'll see. It's actually pretty good. Now, I imagine that I might lose a few of you here. But hang on, and you might have a new appreciation for these literary figures. Ready? Now, quick recap. You may have heard of some of these guys. The most famous, Langston Hughes, for example, of the Harlem Renaissance. William Faulkner, Southern writer, wrote Sound and Fury and so on. You may have heard of F. Scott Fitzgerald, who was the author of The Great Gatsby. Ernest Hemingway, the author of Old Man and the Sea and A Farewell to Arms, I think Snows of Kilimanjaro, and good stuff. T.S. Eliot, who may be a little less well known to some of you, like D.H. Lawrence also, all 1920s. So these guys formed the core of a group called the Lost Generation. Now, of course, Langston Hughes is not included in that, but the other ones, for the most part, are. And the Lost Generation was a group of American writers that were so disillusioned with the state of the United States in the 1920s that they moved to Paris in self-exile. You think you don't understand America anymore. Now, regarding F. Scott Fitzgerald, you may remember that his wife's name was Zelda, if you remember that much. If you don't remember that much, that's okay. Here you go. I'm going to help you get a recap. This, The Great Gatsby is one of those books that we all sort of seem to have to read, whether you like it or not. And if you don't remember, okay, F. Scott Fitzgerald, his wife's name was Zelda, and Zelda was a bit eccentric, to say the least. Now, that actually has something to do with what we're talking about today. Also in the 1920s, just and sort of related, health destinations were all the rage for the wealthy. You know how some people today like to have destination weddings? Well, in the 1920s, used to like to have a lot of them used to like to have destination health trips. Now, it was a continuation of the trend from the 19th century in which rich people, or people that could afford it, flocked to things like spas or fountains or springs or wells that were said to promote health. One of the biggest examples, most famous examples, was W.K. Kellogg's Battle Creek in Michigan. It was one of the favorite ones. And yes, he was the creator of Kellogg's cereal. And yes, they're connected. Now, closer by, the town or the little community of Fuquay Springs was said to contain healing properties, which, of course, later on has become Fuquay Varina, part of it. There was also a place called, just south of that, called Kilibit Springs. Now, if you are from here, you know how to spell Kilibit, if you know the area that well. Kilibit, in case you don't, if you're now able to find it on a map, it's spelled Chalybeat, but don't ever say it's Chalybeat to people that live around the area. It's Kilibit. Call it that and you should be okay. The word Kilibit actually is a really old word which essentially means iron containing. Now, Asheville was also a pretty hot destination, mostly for its altitude, but also for the waters that came out of its mountains around it. The supposed health benefits of the mineral-infused water and the lighter mountain air were big draws for people with stomach ailments and people that suffer from lung ailments like tuberculosis and emphysema. It was claimed that they could breathe better up there, air not quite as heavy. Of course, health institutions of all sorts capitalized on the Asheville health craze. There was also an asylum called a sanatorium back then. They're called Highland Hospital, which it happened to be where Zelda Fitzgerald, wife of F. Scott, died in a fire. It's pretty tragic. If you lived in Asheville in the period, you could do a lot worse, though, than try to capitalize on this health tourism. And there's a family there that understood that better than most. Now, this family that lived in Asheville is going to, again, capitalize on it. And the name of the family was Wolf, ending with an E, W-O-L-F-E. Julia Wolf ran a boarding house for those health tourists and their families called Old Kentucky Home. It really wasn't a richer boarding house or hotel. It was sort of seedy, but still, it made money. And her husband actually made pretty good money himself selling tombstones for when that health tourism didn't work. Now this family, this group, these two entrepreneurs, so to speak, raised 8 children in Asheville. And they had a house in Asheville, and they also had a boarding house right down the street. 7 of the children are going to live in the house with their father. The mother, Julia, took her youngest child to live in the boarding house so that they can maintain and see what was going on. Now, this youngest child's name that went to live with his mother in the boarding house was named Thomas. And now you have the name of another literary figure of the 1920s, Thomas Wolfe. Do not confuse this guy with the author of The Bonfire of the Vanities. It is not the same guy, and it's not the same guy that wrote about psychedelic trippage in the 1960s. This guy was in the 1920s, and he is right up there in terms of influence with Fitzgerald. He may have been, some of his influence may have been lessened. His light may have been lessened over the years, but maybe because these other two authors that have confusing names, and they just get mixed up with his, but really, this guy was a pretty big deal before those guys. And Fitzgerald, F. Scott Fitzgerald, who spent some time in Asheville himself when he was visiting Zelda or a girlfriend, Faulkner said that Thomas Wolfe was better of an author. In fact, was probably the best. Now, in any case, Thomas Wolfe grows up in Asheville, and at 15 years old, he is as much, he seemed to attract attention for his vibrancy and his intelligence, and so at 15 years old, he's going to get admitted to University of North Carolina at around the same time as Albert Coates of the previous podcast, the one just before this one. Now, Coates was a little older, not much, but just a couple years older. They also, both of them, Albert Coates and Thomas Wolfe, attended Harvard around the same time, although there's no indication that they really knew each other. That's not really our Johnston County connection. Now, to get there, to get that connection, we must actually revisit something from the previous podcast, a place called the Turlington Institute of Smithfield. Again, discussed in the most recent podcast called Run This Town. Now, if you heard that podcast, you may remember the aforementioned Albert Coates attended the Turlington Institute. He was just one of the stars to graduate from this institute. William Dodd was another one from the very first podcast that we have called Dancing with the Devil. The Turlington Institute also produced 2 Rhodes Scholars to Oxford, the only Johnston County natives to receive the honor, and they also both attended UNC. Now, one of these Johnston natives to get to be a Rhodes Scholar was named Oscar Ripley Rand Jr. He'll be mentioned in the next episode. This episode is going to partly contain and be about the other one, Edgar Willis Turlington. Now, as you may have guessed, Edgar Willis Turlington was the son of the headmaster and school's pretty much founder, Ira Turlington. Edgar was a model student, but very bookish, very, very structured. His love was for ancient languages like Latin, grammar, and the mechanics of language. After Edgar's University of North Carolina stint and his stint at Oxford University, he returned to UNC in hopes of teaching Latin and language mechanics. But as every first-year teacher can tell you, teaching your first choice in your first year, that ain't going to happen. Even if you were a Rhodes Scholar, that does not happen. Edgar got the least desired position as a result of his being a first-year teacher of any kind of count, teaching literature to college freshmen. He was not very pleased in this assignment. Now, Edgar, as you can imagine, he was focused on structure and accuracy and intellectualism. Freshmen are not known for these things, either in high school or college, generally. And his first class proved that point. But what seemed to especially get under Edgar's skin was one particular freshman. At 15 years old, this freshman was raw and full of emotion. Now, he was, certainly talented, sure, but this 15-year-old was about as far from Edgar's ideal student as you can get. Now, since the freshman sort of stuck out as a 15-year-old of relatively poor background, when the majority of his classmates were 19 and at least middle class, he was picked on a little. And Edgar, he didn't make any documented attempt to stop it. Pranks were played on this student. Edgar didn't stop it. Edgar didn't hesitate in connecting with this freshman who, up until this year, his first year at Carolina, loved writing. This student hated school as a result, and especially his writing class. And he hated Edgar Turlington enough that this future literary giant got a B. Not nearly as bad as his math class or philosophy class or science classes, which he did far worse. But still, and so whenever Thomas Wolfe, at 15 years old, puts in for a transfer to another teacher to mentor his first year in English and literature composition, Edgar's not going to stop him. He's going to let him transfer. Edgar Turlington did not object. And so he switched teachers in the spring. Years later, Thomas Wolfe, after he hit it, and he published his works and he became a famous writer, really, he didn't look upon his UNC years as being magical. But, he didn't really hate it either. But he only really had bad things to say about one teacher from UNC. You can imagine who it was. Wolfe said that Turlington seemingly wanted to put out that literary fire, and more than once, Thomas Wolfe actually said that he thought that he might be successful. Thomas Wolfe considered not being a writer. He was so discouraged. Edgar only taught a couple more years until he got a job at the U.S. State Department. Teaching was not for him, and he sort of realized it. And at the U.S. State Department, he helped shape American international policy and went into law later on. Of course, Thomas, as I've said before, went on to become a literary giant despite Edgar Turlington. And today, Thomas Wolfe's portrait hangs in the West Building on the UNC campus. Edgar, one of UNC's first Rhodes Scholars, he doesn't have a portrait anywhere on UNC campus. So you see, American literature could have been forever changed, since Wolfe's style was a direct influence on Jack Kerouac of the Beat Generation and Ray Bradbury, one of the fathers of modern science fiction, who himself was a direct influence on George Lucas and Stephen King. And also, he was an influence on Pat Conroy, whose novels are like everywhere, Prince of Tides and stuff. These authors had a significant role in the development of 20th century America, and they all point back to Thomas Wolfe. It could have been very different if not for the perseverance of Thomas Wolfe in opposition to Edgar Turlington. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be that episode. Hope you enjoy it. There's so much more to go through because, I don't know, these are great stories. And until next time, y'all be good.